What would be scandalous about Ukraine policy? Most people had not heard enough about Trump's policies towards that country to even guess at the time. And if you were learning about this story from the Washington Post or the Times or most national news in September when Rachel was reporting that out, it was all new. But if you happen to read conservative articles in the opinion section of The Hill back in March, you'd see the seeds of this Trumpian conspiracy theory. Here's a headline quoting a foreign official's unsupported allegation that the Obama administration demanded Ukraine simply avoid prosecuting certain people. A pretty silly article. Here's another from April in the same basic format. A single Ukrainian source claiming the U.S. didn't want evidence on Democrats. Now you can see where this is going. Again, this was back in April before any of this blew up. But around that same time, here is the cherry on top of this conspiracy theory Sunday. Quote, Joe Biden's 2020 Ukrainian nightmare. A closed probe is revived. The second part of that clause, and this was back in April, is just not a thing yet. Closed probe revived hadn't happened. Now, America at that time in April was waiting for the release of the Mueller report. It was 3 weeks away. There was a lot of other news, but this writer for The Hill was speculating about this Biden nightmare that virtually no one was losing sleep over. This is important to what's going to happen tomorrow, because at that time, there'd be no way to distinguish this from 1,000 other headlines for websites and outlets of varying credibility. But those three articles I mentioned, they all have something crucial in common. They're all by John Soloman, a conservative writer who used to be at the right-wing Washington Times and also is an analyst at Fox News and has links to top conservative operatives. The Columbia Journalism Review has referred to him as having basically a history of bending the truth and distorting facts. You should know that up front. If you haven't heard much about Soloman, well, you may be about to hear a lot more about him in the impeachment hearings. Mr. Soloman and President Trump also have the same taste in lawyers. Soloman hired Joe DeGeneva, a lawyer that Trump tried to hire, and like some other politically aggressive lawyers that Donald Trump favors these days, DeGeneva does more than litigate. He pushes political agendas. He goes on Fox News, and that's where he dramatically previewed his disturbing material that would come from his now client, Soloman. This was back in March.
There's some very disturbing details about it. They're about to come out in reporting by John Soloman. And I think once those details come out, I think there's going to have to be a full-fledged criminal investigation.
Wow. Full-fledged. Sounds like he has the inside scoop on what his own client is writing. Now, that Fox News segment was touting the piece I just mentioned, that oh-so-understated headline, which reads kind of like InfoWars fan fiction, the one about the Ukrainian nightmare and the reviving of a probe. So step one, have your lawyer hype the piece on Hannity like there's some independent interest in it. Step two, well, obviously, go on Hannity yourself. Here was John Soloman citing his mysterious Ukrainian sources for this then-obscure story.
Now, the story behind the story. Full report. Investigative reporter, The Hill's John Soloman is with us.
There's a pattern here of Hunter Biden being in the countries where the vice president has a foreign policy portfolio and somehow walking off with some nice paydays. They're telling me tonight, Sean, that they've been trying to get this information to the U.S. Justice Department for more than 6 months.
Well, if there was a U.S. government conspiracy by the Justice Department or State Department, that would sound bad, right? But of course, that last 6 months, that would implicate the Trump administration. DeGeneva and Hannity support Trump, obviously. The other thing here is that the top people involved all say what you just heard from Soloman is false. In fact, Soloman's angle has been backfiring in two ways. One, as a political propaganda mission to help Trump, this has, of course, now brought Trump closer to impeachment than ever. Two, as a conspiracy theory, this Ukraine allegation got really big, too big, and it blew up in Soloman's face, sparking an investigation that has now publicly shredded his claims. The original whistleblower complaint says in March 2019 there were these series of articles in The Hill quoting several Ukrainian officials and those allegations, citing Soloman's work, and that's part of what got Trump in so much hot water. Then there's the Trump officials and diplomats who fact-checked Soloman. Again, I want to be clear, we only know about this because it backfired, because of the probe. But now I can tell you three different officials who served in the Trump administration say when it came to Soloman's Ukraine writing, all the key elements were false. That's former Army officer Vindman. Another saying Soloman peddles baseless conspiracy theories. Another, diplomat George Kent, who we'll hear from publicly tomorrow, was blasting Soloman's fabrications as utter nonsense. Now, that's not just a big rebuttal. That's testimony from people speaking under oath, under the threat of perjury, legally. That obviously carries more weight and potentially more legal peril than what you say in a Sean Hannity segment. So that's a lot. Where are we going? Well, I began this report with the question, how did we get here? To paraphrase the Talking Heads' David Byrne, you may find yourself in another part of the world, and you may ask yourself, well, how did I get here? That's what we all want to know. We got to this other part of the world because of this plot, a plot that began with this serious information propaganda and then was supersized and weaponized. This is important. By the current president and by his top advisors, and was allegedly deployed through the arm and the power of the U.S. government. That's a big deal. Democrats say it's an impeachably big deal. So way back in March, look who Donald Trump was retweeting. Yep, the Soloman theory, citing Fox News, while Giuliani literally traveled around the world trying to will Solomon's theory into reality. Now, Giuliani may not really expect Ukraine to ever, indict the vice president or his family, the former vice president. But weaponizing propaganda isn't about facts. It's about impact. Try to get the talk of the investigation going. Maybe spark an actual investigation. Ukraine was very close to doing that when the money was finally unfrozen. Then Giuliani tries to add more smoke and innuendo and damage to the Bidens, which did, of course, draw them out on defense. You have to see how this works to inoculate against the misinformation. We all know the expression, shoot first, ask questions later. I'm showing you how the Soloman-Giuliani plot works. Smear first, ask questions later, then gin up a process to legitimize that original smear, whether it's DOJ, investigating the investigators, or trying to get this foreign country to review the case. The idea is that later action, this is why it's tricky, the later action tries to trick you into thinking that the original outlandish theory has now become more substantiated by external events, by the smoke. So that is why I'm about to show you something really interesting given tomorrow's hearing. It's vital to Trump and Giuliani that Soloman be ultimately taken seriously, which is why you have Giuliani's ridiculous calls for Soloman to win journalism awards. Call it Pulitzer thirst trapping.
John Soloman, who should get a Pulitzer Prize, by the way, put them all on tape.
So many great people. John Soloman should get the Pulitzer Prize.
That's what the Trump fans are hearing in that stadium. If you hadn't heard that before, you see how that matters to this impeachment probe. John Soloman should get the Pulitzer Prize. That's been teed up to Fox viewers, to MAGA fans, even as the staff inside Trump's own administration was reaching out, ringing alarm bells. Look at this. They directly contacted Hannity's show to emphasize the Ukraine allegations were false. George Kent confirming they suggested Hannity stop covering them, but Hannity kept putting Soloman on air for his breathless dispatches.
Ukrainian law enforcement officials saying, yes, we did try to tip the 2016 election in favor of Hillary Clinton. I have in my possession documents from the Ukraine General Prosecutor's Office.
Soloman promised lots of scoops and dirt and sources, and he has a First Amendment right to say and write and speculate on what he wants. But as this thing has blown up in the faces of these Trump allies, Americans and impeachment investigators are now seeing Soloman's work and some of his sources exposed. One source and collaborator indicted Giuliani associate Lev Parnas, who did vetting and translation for Soloman on these very stories. Diplomats warning Parnas was trying to subvert our democracy. Parnas is now cooperating with impeachment investigators. Soloman has now been formally hired by Fox News as a contributor, which is handy because after the Trump-Ukraine scandal was exposed, Soloman abruptly left his perch at the Hill. The national security site Just Security noting that and adding that Fox News provides a place where Soloman can deploy a, quote, misleading image of an investigative reporter while maintaining radio silence about the details of his own convoluted role in all of this.